Hi and welcome to Photography with Imre, and that would be me. On today's episode, polarizing filters. Before we take a closer look at polarizing filters and how they can be used, here's a quick and simplified physics lesson to get a little background on light polarization. Light is basically an electromagnetic transverse wave, represented here by this graphic. In general, light from sources such as the sun or even the common light bulb is unpolarized. Unpolarized light vibrates randomly on many different planes, whereas what is referred to as polarized light only vibrates on one plane. Most non-metallic materials, such as glass and water, can naturally polarize light. Actually, this is the reason why we get reflections. Another way to polarize light is to use dichroic materials, one of the most popular being Polaroid. Polaroid materials are manufactured in such a way that very long chains of molecules form. These chains are aligned in the same direction, thus are parallel to each other. When light waves come in contact with these chains, some are absorbed almost completely, others partially, while some light waves make it through almost entirely. Depending on how light waves are oriented in regard to those long chains is what affects which light waves make it through or not. The rules to this are actually quite simple. Light waves on a plane parallel to those chains are absorbed by the Polaroid material, and of course cannot make it through. Light waves on a plane perpendicular to the chains are not absorbed, thus continue through the material. Another somewhat more technical way of putting this is that if light can make it through, then those light waves are on a plane aligned with the polarization axis. On this diagram you can see that polarization axis is basically turned 90 degrees from the orientation of the long chain molecules. By the way, light waves on a plane that lie in between the angle of the chains and the polarization axis can make it through partially. The closer the light wave's plane is oriented to the polarization axis, the more that light wave can make its way through. Now, although this is quite interesting, most photographers don't worry much about the inner workings of light polarization. If you want to find out more, my supplemental blog post and Facebook page will have links to some great websites furthering this topic. Before we jump into what a polarizing filter can do and how we can use them, it's important to know that they come in two types, linear and circular. Visually, both do exactly the same thing. What makes them different is that circular polarizers have a quarter wave plate attached to the linear polarizer they are constructed of. Since most modern-day SLR cameras have partially reflecting mirrors and rely to some extent on light polarization to autofocus and meter properly, it's strongly recommended that photographers use a circular polarizer, as linear polarizers can and usually cause autofocus and metering problems in such cameras. I'd rather spend more time on where and how to use filters, so check out my blog for more info on this topic. So why use polarizing filters? Well, there are usually three major good reasons. 1. To deepen the blues in the sky and increase the contrast of clouds. 2. To increase color saturation. And 3. To reduce or eliminate reflections. Let's start with the first reason, and by doing so I can also easily explain how to use these filters. The image you're seeing here is taken through a circular polarizing filter. And so is this image, taken literally about 2 seconds after the first one. To get this stunning difference, all I had to do was rotate the polarizing filter 90 degrees. Simply said, there's not much to using these wonderful filters. Now, if you're a little bit new to polarizing filters, one of the tricks to photographing the sky and getting that vibrant blue effect is that wherever the sun is, perpendicular to the sun is where that effect will be quite vibrant. Now, if you're kind of going perpendicular to the sun, I don't get it. There's a simple way to do this. You point towards the sun. So you take your hand, point towards the sun, and wherever your thumb is pointing is the region of the sky that will have the greatest effect. So if the sun is overhead, the bad part is the effect is going to be greatest towards the horizon, if you kind of go around like that. The way I took my picture was towards the evening, and that's when the sun was setting. So the sun is down low, and the region with greatest polarization effect is right above my head. And that's why I could get that very dramatic blue, as well as the contrast in the clouds. So as mentioned, when you're shooting into the sun and you turn the polarizer to achieve maximum effect, the sky in cloud contrast only darkens towards that zone mentioned, which in this case can be seen on the upper left side of the photograph. Color saturation can also be increased by using polarizing filters. Here's an image I took a few years ago at the Calgary Zoo. Now I will admit that I punched up the saturation a little using digital means, but my results were aided by using a polarizer. And in this video here, where I've left the saturation as is, you can quite clearly see the effect such a filter has on bringing out color. Again, all I'm doing is just rotating the filter 90 degrees back and forth. And lastly, polarizers can be great for removing reflections off of surfaces. These next three images were taken at a location called Ink Pots, a fair hike up from Johnston Canyon here in Alberta. This image of a mineral pool is harshly affected by distracting reflections of the sky and some trees. But by rotating the filter, I managed to eliminate most of it, and voila, we now have a much clearer view. Same with this image. We get a nice clear view into the water without any distracting reflections from the surroundings. Now, of course, you saw the example with the ponds, and that's water, but very frequently you'll find photographers trying to shoot through windows as well, and that's another great place to use polarizers because you can cut the reflection down. And here's an example. I just took one of my pictures, and you can see the reflection off the wall, and it doesn't look that great. So by turning the filter there, you can more or less eliminate that glare. This trick is also used when photographing cars, at like car shows for example, and you want to eliminate a lot of those awkward reflections. You can get a great look by using a polarizing filter for that. Now there's a couple of downsides perhaps to polarizing filters. One is that they do cut down the amount of light that can go through your lens, so you will have to compensate one way or another, increasing your sensitivity, using longer shutter speeds, or opening up your aperture wider. That's another way to kind of gather more light. Now another thing to look out for is when you're using these on wide-angle lenses. You can get some interesting effects where they may or may not be quite desirable. As you can see on this picture here, you can kind of see that almost like a V shape. So use them wisely because you may encounter some of these effects on your pictures. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Polarizing filters are probably one of the most useful out there. You can create some wonderful effects with them. And of course, as usual, check out my blog because I will have a supplemental post there with some additional thoughts on how to use them and links to those websites about further on their topic, how they work and all that. Also, I just created a Facebook page, so you can check that out as well, and you can become a fan. And don't forget to subscribe, that way you can keep up to date with my videos. For next week, my 10th episode, I will be doing a show about 3D photography, so that should be one that you will find quite interesting. So, take care, and I hope to see you next time.